This is the second of our discussions on how to use good compensation processes to improve compensation decision-making, manage meetings, and avoid surprises. We're going to talk about how the committees we work with use process to help them through the challenges of making good compensation decisions against a backdrop of increased complexity, multiple stakeholders with different expectations, and the risk of public criticism.
Gerard, what are some of the processes that the committees you work with use to effectively manage through this complexity?
There's a couple tools or processes that we definitely use to help our committees along the way. One in particular I want to talk about this morning is the comp committee calendar. Committee calendar is a tool that we use with our committees because of just how busy they are. From a cycle perspective, first quarter and fourth quarter are quite busy relative to compensation committee and their actions they basically take. So in essence, the purpose is to put this calendar together and lay out the events throughout the year so we can kind of evenly flow in an appropriate way so we aren't overcompensating, so to speak, for all the different events that need to take place. So by default, first and fourth quarter are quite busy, given the compensation cycle. As you recall, the objective behind the calendar is to align all the different discussions we need to basically have with the committee and all the different action items that need to take place. We talked earlier about having 2 bites at the apple. The idea of being have an opportunity to discuss and then basically approve. Well, the calendar's purpose is to help with that process specifically and figure out how to take advantage of some of that downtime in Q2 and Q3. So what we've done for clients is lay out these events in particular. It's also important to recognize that as you look at this calendar, you need to tie out to things like the charter in addition to the agendas to make sure we don't miss things in an appropriate fashion. So really it's a planful tool to allow that vision to see how things lay out. Chris, we've been talking about the committee calendar as one of the tools that we use. You know, one of the aspects that I see is as people are developing the proxy, they want to try to avoid surprises. And what I mean by that is you think about the process, you start to get at the end of the calendar year, you make pay decisions. How do you keep committees from being surprised relative to the annual proxy development once it becomes public and kind of all comes together?
So much as nobody likes surprises during the ordinary process of the year, committees really hate surprises in the proxy. And those surprises can happen a couple of ways. And the good HR teams that I work with have 2 things in particular that they do to avoid some of these surprises. The first is that if the committee is being asked to make a decision that's not right straight down the fairway, management will prepare draft proxy disclosure. The purpose of this disclosure is to show the committee how the decision they are being asked to make is going to look when they have to disclose it to shareholders. On this first cut, I like to be kind of brutally honest with the disclosure and see how the disclosure sits with the facts there, sort of unadorned and unrefined. Obviously, as you get closer to your proxy disclosure, you may soften some of the language and you may find other things that you want to add. But knowing what that disclosure is helps a committee come to the conclusion that it does have a compelling, disclosable rationale for making the decision that it's being asked to make. And I find that it's a very effective tool. Both in getting the committee to a place where they can make a decision that management needs them to make, but also in making sure that they're not surprised when the proxy comes out. The second tool is designed to avoid what I call the accidental named executive officer. Sometimes if you are making special compensation arrangements, whether it's a retention award or some sort of special performance grant, it can create enough compensation to vault someone who would not ordinarily be a named executive officer onto the summary compensation table. That may need to happen because it's what's important for the business, but it certainly shouldn't happen by accident, and it shouldn't happen without the committee knowing that that's going on. So management typically models expected payouts and the compensation for those 5 senior executives so that we understand whether someone is or is not going to be a named executive officer. I realize there are a lot of moving pieces. What are some of the other things that you do to make sure that your committees are organized and making decisions they're comfortable with?
One of the best tools that I've seen to keep committees informed is what we refer to as a dashboard. Some people, committee members, refer to a cheat sheet. In essence, really what it is a summary document. So as you're well aware, our committee members, board members are very involved. Most of them sit on several different organizational committees. But remember, the details sometimes, or getting confused, often happens. So this dashboard basically is a summary of the compensation programs. What it does is goes into detail around the key elements of the programs. So for example, you will see things that will lay out in this dashboard around how does the short-term incentive plan work, how does the long-term incentive plan work. So you would see details around what are the metrics and what are the performance curves and how they function in the organization. You also will see a listing of just executives, so they can put names and titles together, simple things in terms of just summarizing of current compensation elements. You might see things that summarize special equity grants that were put in place for purposes of retention awards. Back to your prior comment of trying to avoid an unexpected vaulting of an executive into the proxy. So understand the dynamics of how total pay work. In essence, really the purpose behind these dashboards or summary sheets is to make sure the committees are informed in a way and understanding the dynamics, the details of their compensation programs.
That wraps up our thoughts on how committees can use good compensation processes to drive good compensation decisions. Thank you very much for joining us. Stay tuned for more presentations on key executive compensation issues.